Toka is one of the most influential girls in the school. She was kind enough to lend her textbooks to her classmates, but seemed to ignore Ryudaru. She was struggling to carry several boxes of things to class. When Ryudaru called her again, Toka turned around, frowned, and told him to carry the box himself. Ryudaru straightened up and stopped mentioning the topic. When people witnessed how badly Toka treated Ryudaru, they assumed he must have done something to make her hate him. However, the truth is that Toka likes Ryudaru. It's just that she doesn't dare admit it to herself. Toka's friend Saki asks her if something is wrong. Wanting to hide her feelings for Ryudaru, Toka insists that nothing happened. Saki is not a fool, and she quickly deduced that Toka had a crush on one of the boys in the class. Toka started to break out in a cold sweat. Saki pressed her for an answer, and finally Toka had to confess. She and Ryudaru used to be very close friends when they were in elementary school, but since entering high school, they have been frequently teased by their friends. Toka then stated that she only spoke to Ryudaru out of pity for him. Since then, Toka has become shy and overly self-conscious about her feelings for him. Saki suggested that Toka try training with her. It suggests that she imagined Saki as Ryudaru. Toka tried to do it, but then got too excited, causing Saki to put the plan aside for now. Saki suggested Toka try a proven tactic, accidentally bumping into someone to start a conversation. However, when Toka tried to do so, Ryudaru's quick reflexes allowed him to easily avoid the collision. Surprisingly, it was Toka who was the one showing annoyance. This left Ryudaru utterly astonished. Toka implemented her contingency plan. She pretended to drop the eraser. Everything went smoothly at first, but Toka couldn't maintain her composure. When their fingers accidentally touched, she yelled at Ryudaru for daring to touch her. Ryudaru was disappointed to realize that Toka really hated him that much. When school was over, Ryudaru offered to give Toka his umbrella to protect her from the rain. However, when he stood too close, Toka unintentionally pushed him away. This caused Ryudaru to fall into a puddle of water. Ryudaru stood up, understood her meaning, and promised to stay away from her from now on. Toka felt guilty for ruining all her opportunities today. Not only did she sabotage it, but she also tied the opportunity to an anchor, dropped it into the river, and detonated it. Toka wondered why she couldn't be more honest with herself, and I secretly wished I could disappear. Be careful with your wish. The next morning, Toka's mother, Hana, he walked into her room and found it empty. Even though Toka was still there, confused, Toka followed her mother downstairs. But both her mother and younger brother thought she had left home early. Toka wondered why everyone was ignoring her. But then she began to think about the possibility that she had become invisible. She tried her luck at school, but nobody paid any attention to her. Lost in my own world, one of the first things Toka did was secretly peek at a classmate's revealing lingerie. During roll call, Ryudaru accidentally slammed his hand down on the desk when he stood up. This made the whole class burst out laughing. Toka realized she could use this newfound invisibility to get closer to Ryudaru, even though I know it's wrong. She uses this ability to gaze at Ryudaru's face while he sleeps, and I can't stop being fascinated. Later, Toka became curious to know how Ryudaru usually talked to his friends. She accidentally overheard a conversation about why she treated Ryudaru so badly, but the conversation quickly shifted to her alluring body. Toka covered her ears in horror. But what surprised her was that Ryudaru became genuinely angry when his friends talked about her like that, even though they pointed out that she hated him. Toka's heart fluttered as she realized she had fallen for such an upright young man. Toka always knew that Ryudaru was a kind and compassionate person. He has never changed. But she was different. Even so, she still longed to be close to him. Okay, Toka, standing that close to him is a bit much. Please move back behind the yellow line. Toka couldn't get tired of being near Ryudaru without facing any consequences. She desperately wanted to kiss him, and the temptation was too great for her to resist. However, there was something Toka didn't realize. Ryudaru is the only one who can see her, even though she's invisible. All day, he's been wondering why no one else can see her. Seeing Toka express her feelings for him so clearly, Ryudaru was utterly confused. He was certain Toka hated him. But now she was acting as if she were infatuated with him, almost drooling with desire. The day before Ryudaru, I asked Toka to help me carry some boxes of things back to class, but she rudely told him to do it himself. That made Ryudaru feel like Toka hated him. During class, he asked his two friends, Sato and Utsumi, if he had done anything wrong to Toka. Sato suggested that Toka might be acting that way because she likes him, but Ryudaru quickly denied that, asserting that it was impossible. Utsumi agreed. It was completely impossible. Ryudaru wondered if he would ever have a chance to date a cute girl like Toka. He pondered whether there was a way to mend his friendship with Toka. When Toka saw a teacher ask her to deliver some materials to a classmate who lived far away, Ryudaru immediately offered to do it for her. But Toka's negative reaction and the way she treated him as if he were a nuisance caused Ryudaru to quietly withdraw. Ryudaru admitted that he may have acted a little strangely, but returning the eraser to her is certainly fine. However, when their fingers touched, Toka recoiled with a look of disgust. This prompted Ryudaru to spend 15 minutes washing his hands, then ask Sato if he was really that dirty. Later, Ryudaru's friends persuaded him to bring an umbrella to Toka. He reluctantly complied, but Toka pushed him into a puddle of water. Ryudaru bowed his head, trying his best not to burst into tears. His friends tried to comfort him, even though they themselves had once said that the worst thing Toka could do was refuse. Ryudaru reminisces about the past. He was heartbroken because his relationship with Toka would never be the same again. The next morning, he resolved not to interact with Toka anymore. However, Ryudaru caught Toka rubbing against his seat. He cautiously hid behind Utsumi and decided to ignore her. But when she saw Toka secretly peeking under a girl's skirt in the class, he was horrified, wondering why no one had stopped her. Gradually, Ryudaru realized that he was probably the only one who could see Toka. When Toka started staring at me, Ryudaru pretended to be asleep, but that only made her even more boisterous. Throughout the day, Ryudaru gradually became convinced that only he could see Toka. However, he started to worry when he heard his friends talking about Toka. When they started talking about her curvy figure, Ryudaru immediately panicked and stopped them from saying anything more. Ryudaru breathed a sigh of relief when he finally ended that dangerous conversation, but this only seemed to make Toka even more affectionate towards him. What's even stranger is that Toka seems to genuinely like him. This left Ryudaru utterly bewildered. In his opinion, Toka should hate him. When Toka said she would die of embarrassment if Ryudaru found out she liked him, Ryudaru is determined to pretend he can't see Toka forever. To escape the current situation, he sneaked into the restroom. Fortunately, even though Toka is invisible, she can't walk through walls. She's not a ghost. Toka handed Ryudaru a piece of paper, but he accidentally crumpled it up while complaining. She bluntly told him not to make a fuss over a piece of paper. Despite their ability to become invisible, Toka didn't know that Ryudaru could actually see her. Toka was taking advantage of her limited invisibility to pretend that she was in a romantic relationship with Ryudaru, while he tried his best to pretend he didn't see her. Ryudaru wondered how long he could pretend to be asleep, but it seemed he didn't need to continue. Toka seems to have found a way to make herself appear whenever she wants, but the mystery of how she acquired this ability remains unsolved. When Toka explained that she was absent for lunch because she had to run errands for the teacher, Saki immediately dragged her away to complain to the teachers. However, not much has changed. Toka continues to excel in her subjects. Ryudaru noticed that Toka seemed more alluring than usual. He was trying to stay calm, but his classmates Saki and Sato started teasing him. It was said that Ryudaru was probably imagining Toka changing clothes. Toka knew that no matter how Ryudaru responded, he would be in trouble, so he chose to remain silent. Unfortunately, his silence was interpreted as an admission of guilt. However, Toka didn't seem to mind. Ryudaru told the girls to leave the classroom quickly, but Sato deliberately put on a show to attract attention. However, no one appreciated his performance. When the girls finally left, Ryudaru breathed a sigh of relief. However, Toka returned in an invisible state to secretly watch him change clothes. It turns out that men and women aren't much different when it comes to curiosity. Ryudaru found himself in an awkward situation. This was no longer just ordinary curiosity. It had become something high-level. Sato, noticing Ryudaru was still wearing his uniform, unexpectedly pulled down his pants. This nearly made Toka faint from embarrassment. In the class soccer game, Ryudaru was assigned to be the goalkeeper, but Toka was standing less than 2 feet away from him, making it difficult for him to concentrate, especially when the ball is flying fast towards the goal. Toka bent down, preparing to take a close-range shot. Ryudaru realized the ball was about to hit her. For a brief moment, Ryudaru set aside his mission to keep her from getting hurt. He rushed towards her, hoping to pretend he was trying to catch the ball. Ryudaru grabbed Toka, pushed her to the ground, but managed to save the goal just in time, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. He pretended that everything had been planned in advance, so Toka didn't suspect anything. After the match, while Ryudaru was drinking water, Utsumi noticed that he didn't seem well. Ryudaru was extremely tense, trying to pretend he couldn't see Toka. When Toka tries to steal an indirect kiss, Ryudaru hastily picked up the water bottle and continued drinking. Unable to bear the stress of pretending not to see Toka any longer, Ryudaru decided to admit the truth. However, when Ryudaru overheard Toka wishing she could play with him like before, he lost all willpower to continue pretending. Toka's classmates noticed that she had an unmistakable radiant appearance. That was thanks to the fact that she had been able to watch Ryudaru play soccer before. When Ryudaru nearly bumped into her in the hallway, Toka reacted as usual, but she realized that nothing had changed. While Toka tries to find a way to bridge the gap between them, Saki arrives and drags her to a cooking class. When Saki noticed that Toka was still having trouble with her feelings, she suggested that Toka should bake some handmade cookies for Ryudaru, and that's exactly what Toka needed. My classmates didn't seem to take the cooking class seriously at all. But Toka encouraged them with a heartwarming speech about not doing work half-heartedly. In fact, she had a specific motive for wanting to ensure the cookies were perfect. Toka's group members. I watched her as she seemed to fall into a trance-like state while cooking. Unbeknownst to her, she was smiling contentedly at being able to hear Ryudaru's voice. One of the group members, Noyamada, began talking about Ryudaru's good qualities and kindness. Toka really wanted to talk to her about him, but she didn't want to risk revealing her feelings. However, when Noyamada revealed that she intended to confess her feelings to Ryudaru if their cakes were successful, Toka froze. She noticed that Noyamada was always staring at Ryudaru. She never thought that there could be someone else who liked him too. If the cakes succeed, Noyamada will confess, but if they fail, she won't be able to confess. Toka's head started spinning. Utsumi wondered why things were so tense. Unfortunately for Toka, the cakes ended up being very successful, and Noyamada was given the courage to confess. Toka looked at herself in the mirror. This isn't over yet. And she had to witness that confession with her own eyes. Toka returned invisible and followed Noyamada all over the school campus. She still held on to a glimmer of hope that Noyamada was staring at someone else, not Ryudaru. Noyamada exclaimed happily that she had found Ryudaru alone. As for Toka, she knelt down in despair. Noyamada approached Ryudaru, while Toka watched, her heart filled with turmoil. The devil in her head tried to convince her to snatch the cakes from Noyamada's hands, while the angel advised her to give Ryudaru her own cake. Toka did nothing. She let fate decide. However, Noyamada suddenly asked Ryudaru to give those cakes to Utsumi, the person she had set her sights on for a long time. Toka breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't understand why she had been so worried. There's no reason anyone would want to date Ryudaru. Ryudaru feels the cruel pain of reality. When Noyamada left, he left his romantic fate in the boy's hands. Toka decided it was time for her to muster up her courage, too. She wished she could find a way for them to interact like they used to. And her mind drifted back to the daring things they could do together in the privacy of a hotel or on a Ferris wheel. Ryudaru pretended not to hear anything and hurried away. Toka tried to think of a way to give Ryudaru the cakes without arousing suspicion. She said she had too many cakes to eat, but when Ryudaru asked for one, she ate them all and refused the rest. Toka felt like she had missed her only opportunity. However, Ryudaru found a cake that she had forgotten to eat and took it from her table. He thought it tasted delicious, which made Toka happy, but she called him dirty for eating other people's food from their table. Saki rushed over and confiscated the manga. They accused Ryudaru of being lazy at work. She turned back and complained to Toka about it. When Toka saw the title of the book, Big Bro is My Fiancé, she frowned in displeasure and left to return the book to the teacher. Saki asked Ryudaru what he had done to Toka to make her hate him so much. The comforting thing is that Ryudaru didn't have to deliver the book to the teacher himself. Then Toka became invisible and read cutesy manga in front of Ryudaru. He believed that was the genre he liked. Toka flipped through the pages of the book. Hopefully, this manga will help her find common ground with Ryudaru. Unfortunately, she got too excited about the protagonist's cuteness, causing Ryudaru trouble in class. Toka remarked that Ryudaru's interest had definitely changed since elementary school. Although she smiled because of the racy scenes in the manga, she didn't know that this book wasn't by Ryudaru. Toka thought she could rekindle her relationship with Ryudaru if she pretended to be like the main character in the manga, Koharu. Unfortunately, she didn't realize that she had been behaving just like Koharu before. She clapped her hands and decided to try a change of style. Start changing your hairstyle, and took off his socks, causing Ryudaru to turn away. Ryutaro didn't realize the teacher was calling on him to read a passage from the book. But Toka changing clothes right in front of him only made the situation more awkward. Seeing his confusion, Toka offered words of encouragement, unaware that she was the very reason he was in that awkward situation in the first place. Toka perfected her transformation, making Ryutaro's situation even worse. Toka noticed that Ryutaro's face seemed to be turning red. This caused him to unconsciously push himself away from the desk. When Saki asked him what was wrong, Ryutaro explained that there was a bee, but that was the worst possible reason, causing the entire classroom to descend into chaos. Ryutaru breathed a sigh of relief when the class finally ended, but Toka decided to try this new hairstyle in real life. However, when Utsumi and Sato arrived, Utsumi found the manga on Ryutaru's desk. It turned out to be one of his old manga. Utsumi smiled and said that if Ryutaru asked, he would leave the manga for him. Toka realized that the manga wasn't by Ryudaru. He immediately changed back to his old hairstyle. Ryudaru was still the loser, having to pretend he saw nothing. Sato was surprised to learn that Utsumi liked cute things like cutesy manga, and he replied that he wanted a cute little sister, like the main character in the manga. When they asked Ryudaru about his preferences, Toka stared at him. Ryudaru replied that he just wanted an ordinary person. While Toka was completely different, school has finally come to an end. But Ryudaru still couldn't rest. His friend suggested they come to his house to play video games. And even the invisible Toka joined in. Ryudaru thought he would be safe after school. Ryudaru felt like he was about to lose control when Toka kept following him. He tried to change the meeting place. He suggested to Utsumi that they meet at his house instead of Ryudaru's, explaining that he wanted to read the manga beforehand. Utsumi revealed that he always had a copy of that manga on hand, so there was no problem. However, Ryutaro is still in big trouble. A sense of unease builds as Ryudaru tries to convince his friends to back out of their planned get-together, but then Toka tickled him from behind, making him burst out laughing. With no other option, Ryudaru ran as fast as he could. Hopefully I can keep as much distance from Toka as possible. However, Toka still didn't give up. They enjoyed being alone together. Ryudaru ran onto a ship, hoping that Toka wouldn't be able to catch up. But when she got stuck between the train doors, he felt compelled to open the ship's door to rescue her, not wanting to see her trapped inside. Ryutaro tried to remain calm while Toka stood before him. When a passenger accidentally bumps into Toka, this almost caused her to fall into Ryudaru. He stood up and gave his seat to an elderly passenger. This gesture earned Ryutaro extra points from Toka. Toka began to wonder where Ryudaru lived, as she knew he had moved last year. Ryudaru didn't want her to find out which train station he was getting off at. Decide to get off at a random station. The problem is, he doesn't know where he is. Ryudaru tried to escape, but Toka wouldn't let go. Realizing he was lost, Ryudaru opened his phone to check the map. But I accidentally let Toka see my password. He quickly changed his password before his secrets were revealed. Seeing that Toka was more persistent than he expected, Ryudaru decided to stay outside until she couldn't bear it any longer. He had spent most of his allowance, and Toka accidentally revealed the contents of a book he was reading, which annoyed him. Toka felt increasingly comfortable, but then suddenly she started trembling. She needs to go to the restroom, but I want to go to Ryudaru's house. Unable to hold back any longer, she ran away, and Ryudaru seized the opportunity to pay. When Toka returned, she noticed Ryutaru's desk was empty. She started crying and blamed herself for not being able to hold her bladder. But then she saw a familiar woman walk past the window. Ryudaru returned home completely exhausted. His sister, Kiara, said the bath was ready. Ryutaru's mother, Miko, also returned home shortly after finishing her part-time job. However, an uninvited guest showed up at the house, Toka. Toka finally broke into Ryudaru's house. Ryutaru remained completely unaware and took a bath without the slightest worry. Kiara brought him some shampoo to refill the empty bottle. This made Ryudaru feel embarrassed. After changing her shampoo, Kiara left. Ryutaru heard the bathroom door open and wondered what Kiara needed. But it wasn't Kiara, but Toka, who had an unexpectedly filthy imagination. Ryutaru dived into the bathtub to avoid being discovered. He wanted to know how Toka managed to find his house when he thought he had tricked her. Toka quickly sniffed Ryutaru's body soap. Before leaving to find his room, Ryutaru burst out of the bathroom. He absolutely did not want Toka in his room. There are things in this world that are better left unseen. Ryudaru took advantage of Toka's visit and tricked her into leaving his room. However, Ryudaru couldn't just stand there forever. Finally, Toka managed to sneak into Ryudaru's room and started rummaging through everything to find interesting things. She found a photo album of him and his mother and wondered if he was a mama's boy. Toka continued flipping through the album, finding photos of them from elementary school. She happily reminisced about old memories. But when they found the photos and she was no longer in them, because they had been apart since then, she started to feel sad. Toka stopped flipping through the album, realizing she had just upset herself. She hugged Ryutaru's pillow. She smelled it, and her mood suddenly improved. Ryutaru wondered how long Toka would be here, as he really wanted to sleep. He was afraid she would stay the whole night, but I felt relieved to hear her say she would be home soon. Unfortunately, she fell asleep in his bed. Ryudaru had to wake her up without revealing that he could see her. It would be terrible if she had to sleep in his bed all night. He tried to wake her without touching her, but Toka made him try his best. Ryudaru realized he might have to resort to drastic measures to wake her up. Seeing how utterly helpless she was, extremely wicked and illegal thoughts appeared in his head. Kiara wondered why her brother was acting so recklessly. Ryutaru decided to turn up the music, hoping that Toka would wake up. Kiara, annoyed by the noise, burst into the room to ask him to be quiet. Ryudaru asked Kiara if she wanted him to sleep in her room like in the old days. And she answered in the worst way possible, no. Ryutaru ran out of ideas for waking Toka. Kiara, unable to see Toka, he sat down on her, and this eventually woke Toka up. However, to prevent her from being crushed, Ryudaru pulled his younger sister away and forbade her from sitting on his bed. Toka left with a sore back. Hopefully, I'll come back here someday when she can transform and play like before. Ryudaru also wished for the same thing. He wondered how he and Toka had grown so distant. During art class, their teacher announced that they would be dividing into pairs to draw self-portraits. Ryudaru hoped that this would force them to have some private time. So he approached Toka to try and match them up, knowing that Saki wasn't there today. However, Toka rejected him. Toka boasted proudly that she had many other friends to pair up with. But while she was busy bragging about it, Ryudaru became the only one left, and she had to pair up with him. Ryudaru eventually became Toka's drawing partner, as planned. However, Toka refused to look at him out of embarrassment. Toka believes this exercise is impossible, and wondered why Ryudaru had suddenly become so proactive. Ryudaru doesn't know how to draw, and doesn't know how to talk to her either. Things are going badly. Noyamada approached Toka to look at her drawing, and he discovered she was sketching the drawing using a photo she'd taken of him previously. He decided to try and strike up a conversation with Toka, even though she had consistently rejected all his attempts in the past. He asked her why Saki was absent, but he was quickly ignored. Toka was too confused and anxious to think of a suitable answer to give him. Ryuamada can't draw, and he can't speak either. Things seem to be getting worse. Noi approached Toka to look at her drawing, and she asked why Ryudaru was wearing summer clothes even though they were wearing winter uniforms. Toka explained that he seemed too warm, which Noyamada found strange. Toka quickly hid Ryutaru's photo when she discovered it, and Ryutaru seized the opportunity to leave by asking the teacher a question. When he turned around and asked what they were talking about, Toka said he just sat down to draw. Ryudaru felt relieved that he could finally begin, but Toka was too self-conscious about her appearance, so she covered herself up with sketchbooks. Noyamada and Utsumi had finished each other's drawings, while Ryutaru and Toka hadn't started yet. Toka finally mustered the courage to look at Ryutaru, but I could only look at him for 5 seconds at a time. The two argued while drawing each other's portraits. Although Toka seemed as cold as ever, but Ryudaru realized she was actually talking to him more than usual. Those were small victories. Ryudaru finished Toka's drawing, and Noyamada and Utsumi praised his work. Ryudaru suggested that Toka see the drawing, but she coldly refused. Tired of Toka's annoyance, she finally decided to look at her drawing. However, she inadvertently blurted out that she was very happy because Ryudaru's drawing is very beautiful, but she forgot that she was no longer invisible. Toka quickly resorted to her old trick, denying that she had said anything, and she retreated to the infirmary. Ryudaru lamented that he was once again unable to connect with Toka, but he saw the drawing of himself that Toka had drawn. Despite the noisy and hostile atmosphere, she was still able to draw him. Toka returned in her invisible form. Hopefully next time, Ryudaru can draw her as one of his Japanese girls. Ryudaru rushed to school to avoid Toka, and he succeeded in hiding from her by hiding behind trash cans. Yanagi, a classmate of Ryudaru's, asked him what he was doing there. He replied that he liked small, cramped spaces. Yanagi is Ryutaru's classmate. She rarely speaks to him, and he doesn't know much about her. She seemed like the lonely type, and he just hoped she would forget what she had seen earlier. However, she spent most of the class occasionally glancing at him. Toka then noticed that Yanagi had been looking at Ryudaru more often lately. Actually, she was counting the number of times Yanagi looked at him. Toka worries about having to deal with an annoying stalker, unaware that she herself is an annoying stalker. Ryudaru felt stressed about having to pretend that Toka couldn't see, and he declined his friend's invitation to eat. He went up to the rooftop alone, where Yanagi asked if she could sit next to him. Toka's expression said it all. Toka was angry because Yanagi suddenly showed interest in Ryudaru and sat too close to him. Not wanting to be defeated, Toka jumped up and sat on Ryutaru's lap. Toka felt smug because she got to sit closer to Ryudaru than Yanagi. When Yanagi tried to strike up a conversation with Ryudaru, Toka tried to get attention by kissing Ryudaru, but failed. Yanagi noticed that Ryudaru had been acting strangely lately. It was as if he was trying to avoid something. Toka began putting the pieces together, and Ryudaru knew he had to end this conversation. Ryudaru was so focused on avoiding Toka that he forgot to pay attention to everything and everyone around him. As Toka tries to figure out why he's acting so strangely, Ryudaru tried to distract them both by talking about his lunch. The more he tried to de-escalate the situation, the deeper he got himself into trouble. Ryudaru tries to relieve the pressure on himself by suggesting that Toka have lunch with them. Toka was touched that Ryudaru wanted to have lunch with her. Despite Toka's cold and unpleasant behavior towards Ryudaru, he still hoped she would soon return to his presence. Toka left to get lunch. and Yanagi asked Ryudaru if he could see things that others couldn't. Ryudaru pretended not to understand what she was saying, but Yanagi saw through him. She knew he must have seen the ghost running around here. Ryudaru tried to pretend it was just a ghost, but Yanagi was thinking of something like an invisible person. Yanagi invited Ryudaru to join the Ghost Research Club because she was facing manpower issues. She left hoping to receive a positive response. Toka returned to her lunch, but she remained invisible. In any case, Ryudaru had safely escaped the situation. On his way home, Ryudaru tried to think of a way to escape from Toka. When it suddenly started raining, he spotted a playground and decided to take shelter from the rain there. Ryudaru went under the slide, but Toka slipped and fell. Her wet hair made her look like Satoko. Toka's clothes were wet and ruined, and she thought about taking off her uniform. Ryudaru felt he was in serious danger. Because Toka was invisible, she knew there would be no consequences for what she was about to do. After a difficult attempt to remove her uniform, she put it away, worried that they might still be visible. Ryudaru didn't know how he would cope. What if Toka tried to harass him while semi-naked? Having no other choice, he took off his jacket. And Toka immediately put it on. He felt temporarily safe. Ryudaru took advantage of this time to breathe a sigh of relief. Toka tried to take a selfie of the two of them, but it didn't work out. Ryudaru suddenly wondered if Toka was wearing underwear. A stranger suddenly appeared, also looking for shelter from the rain. Ryudaru initially tried to chase that person away, but Toka stood up to give him her seat. While Ryudaru and the stranger spoke in hushed tones, Ryudaru occasionally glanced at Toka's rather revealing pose. Luckily, Toka was indeed wearing underwear underneath. However, Ryudaru felt as if he were committing a crime when he looked at her. Toka began to breathe heavily. It wasn't because she felt aroused, because she couldn't maintain that uncomfortable position any longer. Toka's legs began to tremble. She tried to shift her body weight to a more comfortable position. But in the end, she slipped and fell straight onto Ryudaru. Before Toka's entire weight collapsed on her, Ryudaru quickly rolled off the road and fell onto the wet ground. The rain has stopped. Toka stood up, even though she felt very uncomfortable having to go home in her underwear. However, Toka discovered that she had been carrying her gym clothes in her bag all this time. She took off Ryudaru's jacket and gave him one last look before leaving. Ryudaru's gym instructor is very strict in his classes. Unable to bear it any longer, Ryudaru fainted. The nurse discovered he had a high fever. It might be because he got caught in the rain yesterday. Toka sneaked into the infirmary and asked Ryudaru what had happened. He replied that he only had a slight fever. He hoped this would please her and make her leave. Toka returns in her invisible form and takes a doctor's outfit to impersonate Ryudaru. However, she suddenly started coughing. Ryudaru recalled that Toka had gotten even wetter than him when it rained. And he also remembered something else. Toka realized that both of them had a fever, making the situation look like they were a couple, and she had no problem with that. Toka took off her doctor's coat and lay down to rest. She recalled an incident from elementary school when both she and Ryudaru were sent to the infirmary with fevers. They talked incessantly, causing the nurse to scold them. They wondered how their relationship had progressed to this point. Toka wishes she could talk to Ryudaru like she used to, but she couldn't help feeling shy around him. The nurse turned around and asked Ryudaru if he wanted pills or suppositories. Ryudaru quickly requested the pills. The medicine made Ryudaru sleepy, but Toka didn't drink anything and started to feel cold. Toka looked at the empty space on Ryutaru's bed and crawled into bed with him. Ryudaru closed his eyes tightly, but his body temperature began to rise. Toka feared that he would die. She tried to maintain her invisible form for as long as possible. But her endurance finally ran out. Ryudaru glanced to the left and saw that Toka had become visible again. He didn't know what to do in this situation. He begged Toka to realize that she might be seen. The nurse pulled back the curtain and saw a boy and a girl lying in the same bed. She asked Toka what she was doing. Toka frantically searched for an excuse, but all she could do was apologize for sneaking into Ryudaru's bed. Fortunately, the nurse remained calm. She told Toka to return to her bed and promised to keep the matter a secret. However, no one knew that Yanagi had witnessed everything. Aren't they supposed to be studying? Yanagi wondered. While Ryudaru was playing with his friends, Sato noticed that Yanagi was staring at them again. She approached Ryudaru again and asked him if he had considered joining the Ghost Research Club. She also revealed that she could see ghosts. This was completely new information for Sato and Utsumi. Sato encouraged Ryudaru to join the club. Utsumi invited Yanagi to sit with them. Yanagi sat right next to Ryudaru in his seat, but something even scarier than a ghost was watching them. It was Toka. Toka complained of stomach pain and went to the infirmary, which Ryudaru knew was her technique to safely become invisible. Nagi insists that Toka is only faking being sick, and that she knew her secret. Sato excitedly asked what the secret was. Yanagi said that she saw Toka's transformation in the infirmary, while she was sleeping in bed next to Ryudaru. Ryudaru couldn't believe his ears. Yanagi seemed to have actually witnessed what had happened. Yanagi noticed Ryudaru was worried and asked him if he wanted to keep Toka's secret. Ryudaru asked her not to reveal anything further in front of everyone, and she promised to keep it a secret on the condition that he would join her Ghost Research Club. Ryudaru really didn't want to join such a strange club. Time is running out, and Toka could return at any moment, which could reduce his chances of escaping this situation. He pretended to have a sudden change of mind about joining the club and asked Yanagi to lead him there. Ryudaru found a quiet spot with Yanagi. She asked him how long he had known Toka's secret, and he replied that it had been a month. Yanagi knew that she was just pretending to be asleep at the time. Yanagi asked him why he was trying so hard to keep Toka's secret, and he replied that it was partly his fault that Toka had become the way she was. Although Ryudaru was also tormented by the situation, he realized that he finally had someone to rely on in this matter. He trusted that Yanagi would keep this a secret. Ryudaru shared that he really wanted Toka to return to how she used to be. Yanagi offered to speak to Toka on his behalf, but that's exactly what Ryudaru didn't want. He begged her not to do it, but she pointed out that all his efforts so far had failed. If she were the one to speak up, everything would end smoothly. Ryudaru placed his trust in her. However, Ryudaru began to wonder if his life was really getting better. When Yanagi revealed her secret, she didn't. He changed his mind and asked Yanagi if she could handle the situation herself. Yanagi asked, if that's the case, can he handle Toka? And he insisted that it was his problem. Therefore, the responsibility lies with him. Yanagi seems to have misunderstood what Ryudaru has been hinting at for the past 15 minutes. When she asked him to take care of Toka's repressed desires, Ryudaru asked her what she thought she'd seen in the infirmary, and she replied that Toka had probably sneaked into the bed to sleep with the boys. Ryudaru realized that she had no idea Toka was invisible. Ryudaru wasn't sure if he could tell Yanagi the truth, so he just continued with the theory that Toka was a greedy girl who was never satisfied. For this reason, he begged Yanagi to keep quiet. Surprisingly, she seemed very comfortable and receptive, especially since Ryudaru had promised to join her club. Ryudaru wondered if he had made the right decision, as he felt like he had made things worse. Finally, he joined the weird paranormal research club.